Let's learn about how to play with the king when most of the pieces and pawns have been traded. Start by moving your king in front of your pawn. I have only my king to move, so I suppose I will move him. Here is the main idea of this lesson. Instead of pushing your pawn, step in front of your pawn with your king. My king races to oppose yours in the center. Move your king forward. Our kings now oppose each other, and it is my turn to move. My only option is to move my king and allow your forward progress to continue. Move your king forward. With our kings standing one square apart, I must yield ground to your advancing king again. We chess players would say you have taken the opposition. Step forward and force my king out of your pawn's path. I can try to approach your pawn, but your king keeps my king just out of reach. Now charge forward with your pawn. My only hope is to move backwards and try to step in front of your pawn. Advance your pawn further up the board. Let's see what happens if I try to block your pawn's path. Moving your pawn now would be a mistake. Step your king in front of your pawn instead. You have the opposition again. With our kings separated by one square, it is my turn to move, and so I must yield ground to your king. Move your king to d7, the square that I gave up by moving to the side. My king can only watch as your pawn advances. The pawn's path to coronation is guarded by your king. That's check, though I was going to move my king anyway. Push your pawn forward again. Notice how the squares it needs to promote are guarded by your king. Your king prevents my king from blocking the pawn, so I cannot prevent your next move. Push your pawn forward once more to promote. By placing your king in front of your pawn, you forced my king out of the way. We will use this technique throughout this lesson. This example is similar to the first one. Again, place your king in front of your pawn, taking the opposition, to push my king out of the way. If I move left, you will go right, and if I go right, you can advance to the left and force my king out of the way of your pawn. Your king defends every square that your pawn will cross on its path towards coronation. March your pawn forward to its destiny. That's check. Well, I was going to move my king anyway. There's no stopping your pawn. Notice how your king protects your pawn and the square where it is headed next. Advance your pawn once more to promotion. This is an important example. With your king in front of your pawn, you are able to push my king out of your way. If I place my king directly in front of my pawn, I will win as in the previous example. Let's see what happens if I play a different move. Move your king in front of mine to oppose his forward movement. The opposition is also an instrument of defense. You have the opposition, and I cannot make progress. What if I step to the side? Copy my movement and maintain the opposition. With our kings standing in opposition to one another, I cannot make any forward progress. Follow my movements with your king to continue opposing my forward progress. Thwarted again. Step in front of my king once more to continue blocking my advance. Remember, you're unable to win in this position, so your goal is to prevent me from winning. Copy my king's movements to maintain the opposition. Let's see what happens if I advance my pawn. That's check. Move His Majesty to the square in front of my pawn to prevent any further progress. I have only one option if I wish to continue the game. A crucial moment has been reached. Step your king straight backwards to be able to follow my king's movement on the next turn. Now if I go to the left of my pawn, you can block me by moving to the left. And if I go to the right, you can maintain the opposition by doing the same. Check again. Step in front of my pawn again and the pattern will repeat. If I step away, you will capture my pawn, so there is again only one move for me to continue this dance. We have a critical moment in this lesson once more. Move your king straight back to anticipate both options that my king has on the next move. If I move to the right, you move to the right. If I move to the left, exactly. One last check. Be sure to block my pawn, or else it won't be a pawn on the next turn, but a queen. If I move away, you will capture my pawn, and if I protect my pawn, it will be stalemate, a draw, because you have no legal moves. Let's look at another example of this technique. Let's learn about a special case when the kings are far apart, called the distant opposition. Here, you want to maintain an odd number of squares between the kings, so step sideways instead of forwards. See how there are 3 squares between the kings. Now if I step forward, you can also step forward, and there will be only 1 square between our kings. The opposition is yours. By keeping an odd number of squares between the kings, you maintain the opposition from a distance. In this example, begin with check. No matter where my king flees, I cannot avoid the exchange of rooks on d7. Capture my rook. I am obliged to recapture. Don't move your king to e5, because that would allow my king to go to e7, taking the opposition. You'd be unable to make any further progress, and I could force a draw. You have taken the diagonal opposition. This is good for you. Now, when I move to e7, you can move your king to e5 and keep the opposition. If it were your turn, I would block your king by following his movement, but the turn is mine, so I must move out of your way. Force my king out of the path of your pawn. I can try again to block your king. But you can maintain the opposition by moving your king to e6. Unable to stay put, my king must yield to your advancing forces. Step forward to f7 with your king, and I will resign. Your pawn has a clear and protected path to promotion. Let's look at another example of the active king. My king is well placed, but I am going to move it away from the center to win a pawn. My king attacks 2 pawns at once, but you can only defend 1. Move your king towards the center. Your pawn on a5 is mine. Advance your king to the center of the board. Your king is now more active than mine, and it only cost you a pawn. Your pieces are perfectly placed to strike. Push your pawn forward to c5. Sensing the danger, I begin to panic. I want to push your valiant king backwards, but there is no stopping his rampage. I race back with my king to try and prevent the breakthrough, but he is too slow. Crack open my defenses with your pawn. At least I can exchange one of my pawns for yours, and though it does not stop your advance. One last defensive try. I will blockade your pawn with my rook. Break my blockade with your king. My blockade is weak, and your king is too strong. Supported by your king and rook, your passed pawn is unstoppable. I'm out of ideas, but will check you one final time for good measure. Your king is in check, but he does not retreat. Boldly push him forward to e7 instead. Now your pawn cannot be stopped. Let's see how your king can command his army from the center of the board. First, defend your pawn by moving your rook to f3. I'm not ready to exchange rooks, so I will retreat. Capture my undefended pawn with your king. My king is not much help in this battle, while yours patrols the board. Now let's get your pawns advancing. Move your king in front of your pawns to lead their advance to promotion. Your king stands tall in the center of the board. I can give him a check with my pawn. But this does not prevent his reaching the squares in front of his pawn. Your king is a menace, but the real threat is your pawns. For now, my bishop prevents your pawn's advance. Bring your king back to help guide them forward. Perhaps I should bring my king into the game as well. Your king exerts tremendous force from the center of the board. Push your pawn forward to d4. Your rook prevents my king from approaching the center of the board, while my pieces are unable to stop your pawns. Place your bishop on the outpost b5, where it limits my options. From its outpost on b5, your bishop attacks my rook and surveys the e8 square where your pawn is destined to promote. Push your pawn forward to its destiny. I have a passed pawn too, though mine is unaided by my king and too far from promotion. Simply pushing your pawn will cause my resignation. When few pieces are left and there is no threat of checkmate, your king can help passed pawns advance without fear of opposing forces. Let's see an example of how the king can penetrate an opponent's camp with deadly effect. Notice how my king is far away from the action on g7, while yours is coordinating with your rook to wreak havoc. I would like to expel your king, but he sneaks in anyway. Your courageous king attacks my rook on b7 and undefended pawn on d6 at once. This check forces your king forward further still, but it does not stop your plan. With my pawns on a7 and d6 under threat, I have only one move to defend them both. Your rook and king work together to overwhelm my defenses. Unable to defend, I can try to go on the attack. But my rook is no match for your active king. You capture a pawn, I capture a pawn, but you capture another pawn still. Capturing my pawn on e5 will defend your pawn as well. While your active king and rook can continue to attack my pawns, your passed pawn on d5 will decide the game in your favor, so I resign. It looks like your king has no way into my position here. Start by checking my king with your rook. Rather than let you capture my pawn, I decide to block with my rook. However, you can capture my pawn anyway. Let's see what happens when you do. Naturally, I will take your rook with mine. But now your king is able to penetrate my fortress with decisive effect. I can save my rook for a turn or two, but your king and pawn are simply too far advanced to be stopped. Penetrate further with your king and attack my rook again. I could run away, but eventually I will have to sacrifice my rook for your pawn. Let's get on with it. Now take my rook with your king. We have 3 pawns each. But you have something else, the opposition. Step your king forward to take it. The turn is mine, and I must yield to your marauding king. Maintain the opposition and attack my pawn on d6. No matter where I move my king. You will capture my pawn on d6 next. In this exercise, you sacrifice material to activate your king and gain the opposition with decisive effect. Let's practice what you've learned. Your king stands ready to lead his pawn into battle, but where exactly should he move? That's the right idea. Your king takes the opposition and nudges mine out of the way. How can you force my king further out of your pawn's path? Very good. Forcing my king out of the way of your pawn. What is the shortest path to victory? A bold move. Your king guards the squares your pawn will take on its path to promotion. Let's look at another example. Sometimes, you have to give something away to get your king to the square you want. Let's see what happens if you push your pawn forward. Hastily, I take your advanced pawn. My knight checks your king and attacks your knight. How should you respond? Okay, I will capture back. And now? Perhaps I can block your pawn. Your move. Nice work. You've taken the opposition. Remember this idea. Sometimes you must give something away to get an important square for your king. Just as in the last example, here you will need to sacrifice something to advance with your king. How could you lure my king away to allow yours to advance to e5? Now is not the time for slow moves. Be bold and look for a sacrifice. Just as in the last example, here you will need to sacrifice something to advance with your king. How could you lure my king away to allow yours to advance to e5? You may have to give something away to get the square you want. Just as in the last example, here you will need to sacrifice something to advance with your king. How could you lure my king away to allow yours to advance to e5? That move would give you control of the e5 square, but the square is not worth the price of a full bishop. Look for another way to nudge my king away from d6. Just as in the last example, here you will need to sacrifice something to advance with your king. How could you lure my king away to allow yours to advance to e5? A very clever decoy. By giving up a pawn, you gain entry into my position for your king. I've taken your pawn. What is your next idea? A valorous move. Your king threatens to invade my camp while preventing mine from entering yours. And now? My poor pawns are defenseless against your marauding king. My king races to defend, but is not in time to prevent the carnage. An impressive invasion. Next, you will dispatch my pawns on h7 and g6, clearing the way to promote yours. Let's look at a practical example where there are still some pieces on the board. Here you have an extra pawn, but with the rooks on the board, I still have some hope. It is your move. No matter where I move my king, I cannot avoid the exchange of rooks. So much for my hope of holding you to a draw. Your move. If I don't take your rook, I will lose sure enough. And if I do take your rook, say, I have ceded ground with my king. Do you see how to exploit this? Well played. You exchanged the rooks to force my king back and then took the opposition. I have another problem for you. In this exercise, our kings are far apart. Do you see how to take the opposition from a distance? That move loses the opposition. Remember to keep an odd number of squares between our kings. In this exercise, our kings are far apart. Do you see how to take the opposition from a distance? Count the number of squares between our kings. You want to make them odd. In this exercise, our kings are far apart. Do you see how to take the opposition from a distance? Taking the distant opposition. Very nice move. Well, what if I advance my king in front of my pawn? Did you have a plan to meet this strong move? Exactly. The opposition is yours, and now I cannot make any further progress. Kudos on using distant opposition to solve this little puzzle. Here we have a unique position. Start by considering every check, no matter how crazy it may appear. Yes, you captured my knight, but this is stalemate. Try again and look for checks. Here we have a unique position. Start by considering every check, no matter how crazy it may appear. A cunning concept. If I take with my king, you will capture my knight, and if I take with my knight, you have given me your rook, but your king stands ready to attack. Incredible. My only legal move is to sacrifice my knight. It's yours for the taking. And now you have the opposition as well. Your move. You have captured my pawn, but it looks like I may block your progress. I have taken the opposition. However, with your king in front of your pawn on the 6th rank, we see an important exception to the rule. Let's see what happens if I try to maintain the opposition. Your move. I will try to block your pawn once more. Your move. Excellent move. My king now has only one option. And now? Nice work solving this unusual puzzle. Let's look another one. In this example, your own pawns block your king's route into my camp. Do you see a way to change that? That move misses the chance to make way for your king. Look for a pawn sacrifice. In this example, your own pawns block your king's route into my camp. Do you see a way to change that? Well, I suppose I will take that pawn. Your move. You sacrificed a pawn to activate your king. Next, your rook will occupy the open file, and my pawns on f5 and h5 will fall. Nice job solving this problem. Let's test your understanding of the opposition with this tricky exercise. I have a pawn, but the move is yours. How can you prevent me from making progress? I was afraid you might do that. Your move. Well, perhaps I'd better try something different. I'm testing you. Nice technique. It's clear that you understand the opposition. Let's look at another puzzle. Here we have a simple pawn ending, but can you win it? You've taken the opposition and given me no good options. Your turn. Your king guards the pawn's path to promotion. Your move. With your king protecting its path, there is no stopping your pawn. Here is another exercise where you're on the defense. I have an extra pawn and a centralized king. Let's see. Can I simply crash through and win at once? Should you take my pawn, or shouldn't you? My question was a misleading trick. You should definitely take my pawn. Should you take my pawn, or shouldn't you? Of course, I will take back. Your move. How can you defensively take the opposition here to prevent my forward progress? Nicely done. You've prevented my king from stepping in front of my pawn. Here we have a tricky puzzle. Our kings are so far apart that yours cannot prevent mine from stepping in front of my pawn. Your move. Nice move. However, my king can still advance unopposed. Your position looks hopeless, doesn't it? Bravo! You have mastered the distant opposition. Here is a puzzle with queens on the board, and I see my king is in check. What if I decide to block with my queen? Was this a good idea? Of course, I have to recapture. And now? And the opposition is yours. How do you make progress now? Yes, that is the correct idea. But I must test you again. How do you continue to make progress now? Yes, and with the opposition in hand, there is no preventing your pawn from promoting. Well played. In this exercise, you're on the defense. I have an extra pawn, but the move is yours. Can you prevent me from promoting? Yes, I see. Now my king cannot advance. What if I advance my pawn? Do you think you can stop me from winning still? Your king blocks my pawn and prevents my king's advance. Now you must give ground. Your turn. Now you understand the technique. Your king stands ready to oppose mine no matter which square I move to next, d3 or f3. Your move. Your king opposes mine once more, so I suppose I will advance my pawn. Your king is in check and has only two options. Which do you choose? Very well played. If I move away with my king, you capture my pawn, and if I step to e3, it will be stalemate. In this example, we have a complex position with many possibilities. Play to your strengths. There are many possibilities here, but advancing a pawn closer to promotion is best. In this example, we have a complex position with many possibilities. Play to your strengths. That pawn will be hard to stop. Check to your king. I must stop that passed pawn at all costs. Your move. I am compelled to give you my rook to get out of check. Will you take it? My turn to push a pawn. My pawn is unstoppable. How will you respond? We have a pawn race. Your turn. It looks like I will win this race. Now I have a newly minted queen. What's your plan? That is a bothersome check. I suppose I will step my king to the side. Your move had better be a good one, because my queen stands ready to pounce. Checkmate. I missed this idea. Very well played. Your valiant king play secured the victory in this puzzle. For our final challenge, a simple rook and pawn ending. Your move. If I block the check with my rook, you can play your king to the square g5. That would force an exchange of rooks and allow you to win the opposition. So, I think I will move my king. And now? Nice move. I have no choice to but exchange rooks, as otherwise you will win mine on the next turn. Your move. After the exchange of rooks, you have the opposition. Well done. The race to the pawns begins. The opposition is still yours, but I am focused on reaching the pawns. Your turn. Let's see who reaches the pawns first. Your move. You've held the opposition for several moves, but it's my king who reaches the pawns first. My pawn controls c5, so that square is not available to your king. Any other ideas? Don't yield ground now. Look for a way to force my king to move aside. My pawn controls c5, so that square is not available to your king. Any other ideas? Forcing my king to step aside. Well then. How should you continue? I don't like how close you're getting to my pawn. My pawn is safe for now. What is your next idea? I see. The opposition is yours. And now? You have managed to attack my pawn. Luckily, I still have one move to defend it. Your move. My pawn is indefensible. Very well done. Your move. You demonstrated mastery of the opposition in this example. I am impressed. Remember to be brave with your king in the endgame. Excellent work completing this lesson. Remember to activate your king once most of the pieces have been exchanged and look for opportunities to take the opposition. Onwards.